What do you do when someone harms your reputation? We talk about this a lot in marketing. We certainly understand it in a personal context, but reputation management is a critical aspect of public relations and modern marketing practice. And there's a reason it is. Uh, when we think about reviews on Amazon, when we think about reviews on Yelp, when we think about kind of the idea or the reputation behind a company, and how does that influence how people make decisions on how to patronize or not patronize a particular business? Reputation is one of those squishy things that is very difficult in many ways to connect kind of A to B to C to buyer behavior, but it's critical still. There's a relationship there. We may not be able to know exactly what it is quantitatively in all aspects, but it certainly does make a difference. And in this chapter in Marketer in Chief, this is chapter 5. We're so really early in the history of the presidents. This is James Monroe. And there are a lot of things we could talk about with Monroe, this era of good feelings. We could talk about, kind of that, just this is right before kind of the Jacksonian era, all of those sorts of things. We could talk about the Monroe Doctrine. But honestly, I think one of the most important things that the young country had to figure out was, how are we going to address reputational harm? If you read the Constitution, it talks a lot about property. It talks a lot about kind of the rights between the federal government and the states, all of the legal sort of stuff. If someone hits you in their car, there's kind of a legal path to get compensation. But when you talk about reputational harm and you think about libel and slander laws, very difficult to prosecute, really tough. If someone calls you an asshole on Twitter, are you going to really file a lawsuit against that person? Where's the line between free speech, which is in the Constitution, and kind of libelous or slanderous communication, which is part of civil law? So this is a tricky issue. And in chapter 5, we talk about, instead of kind of talking about the kind of more the politics stuff, we talk about reputational harm. And the story I tell is this, essentially an aborted duel between none other than Alexander Hamilton and James Monroe. Now, if you remember your history, Hamilton was killed in a duel by Aaron Burr not long after this, and it was Aaron Burr who played a role in kind of pulling James Monroe and Alexander Hamilton apart. The story is really fascinating. It's a ton of fun. You learn a lot about dueling culture, where people would kind of go out onto a field and shoot each other with pistols, or at least try to. Luckily, at that era, the weapons of that era were not very accurate. But we talk about, kind of go through that entire sequence, how it works. And what I wanted to do in the chapter was connect kind of this issue of reputational harm to really an issue we'd never really solved, which is, what do we do when our reputation has been damaged? We tend to think that, that's not quite as serious as getting into a car accident and getting compensated for our injuries. But I would agree that that's because we're not thinking about physical health and mental health in the same way. Reputational harm has long-lasting, just from a personal perspective, has long-lasting consequences, not only in your social life, but also in your professional career. From a business perspective, a bad reputation can have long-lasting negative financial implications. And again, although there isn't as much of a direct line from kind of point A to point B, it's still a big deal. So in this excerpt, I want to read a little bit about kind of the end. We're going to read towards the end of the chapter and connecting dueling culture to cancel culture and what those issues might be. So here's a short excerpt from chapter 5, James Monroe, in Marketer in Chief. Despite the fall of dueling culture, the issue of reputational harm never really went away. It's no wonder that Monroe and Hamilton's concern with honor still resonates with us. We've entered a brave new world of high reputational stakes and lax enforcement of rules protecting us. And this time, women and religious leaders, the voice of reason in Monroe's day, are in the thick of it with the rest of us men. In many ways, cancel culture is the modern answer to dueling culture, with social media followers as seconds, social media platforms as the field of honor, and viral tweets as bullets in the pistols. Although we may dismiss social media feuds as childish and inconsequential, the reality is that reputations are harmed, careers go off track, mental health suffers for both the duelists and the observers, and in some cases, it can lead to physical violence. A good reputation is a critical marketing tool. It helps organizations convince customers that products are safe, services are reliable, and that laws are being followed. Leaders use positive reputations to persuade followers to trust them to do the right thing, especially when no one is watching. With this context, we can understand why Monroe was so concerned about Hamilton's challenge. If he allowed it to stand, he might not have had the standing in the eyes of his peers and the public to ascend to the presidency. Monroe and Hamilton never came to blows, but I'm not sure they truly resolved anything. That's unfortunate. We may be separated by more than 2 centuries from walking out into fields with pistols, but I wonder if we're handling our bruised egos any better. I don't think we are. That's it. I am really excited about this particular chapter. I got to learn a lot about dueling culture, which is crazy interesting. Way, way different. If you've watched movies where there are duels, like Princess Brides, where they kind of went at each other with swords. Swords were before pistols, by the way. It isn't like that at all. And it's really this kind of ritualized